The pigeon did not invade your city. It came home. The gray bird outside the train station is not some wild creature that forced its way into civilization. It is the feral descendant of the rock dove, a cliff-dwelling bird humans began domesticating at least 5,000 years ago. We bred pigeons for meat. We collected their manure for fertilizer. We turned them into religious symbols, ornaments, racers, and pets. Then we carried them across the world. Even now, the difference between a delicacy and a pest can be nothing more than ownership. A young domestic pigeon raised for meat is called squab and remains part of Chinese, Egyptian, French, and other cuisines. Put its cousin on a restaurant plate, and it is tradition. Put it on a windowsill, and it is vermin. Look at a city through a pigeon's eyes. The glass, stone, and concrete are not a foreign landscape. They are cliffs without mountains. Window ledges are nesting shelves. Attics are caves. Pavements are feeding grounds where grain, bread, and human waste appear every day. We did not merely invite this animal into our world. We redesigned the world around the exact things it already knew how to use. So this is the argument. Pigeons are not a plague. We made the pigeon problem. We domesticated them, transported them, employed them, abandoned them, and then treated their survival as an act of trespass. When you say they do not belong in your city, what exactly do you think they entered without an invitation? For most of human history, the pigeon was food, property, technology, or a sacred symbol. The flying rat is the recent invention. In 1966, New York's Parks Commissioner Thomas Hoven called pigeons rats with wings. A 1980 Woody Allen film pushed the phrase into popular culture. By the 1990s, a study of American newspapers found that the metaphor had become almost automatic. The animal had not suddenly changed, its social address had. Once a pigeon belonged in a dove cote, it produced meat, fertilizer, or messages. Once it lived independently in the city, the same body became disorder. Its real offense was not merely droppings. It was being visibly alive in spaces humans imagine as clean, controlled, and exclusively ours. There are legitimate health concerns. Large accumulations of bird droppings can support fungi, and dry secretions can expose people to pathogens when dust is disturbed, especially workers and people with weakened immune systems. But that is not the same as saying the pigeon beside your park bench is a Roman epidemic. A major medical review found documented transmission from feral pigeons to humans was sporadic and the overall risk very low, even in many close contact occupations. The lie is not that pigeons can carry disease. Many animals can, including pets and people. The lie is that disease explains the depth of our disgust. We built the artificial cliffs. We supplied the discarded food. We retired the worker. Then we used the language of contamination to pretend the resulting animal was never ours. So when you call a pigeon filthy, are you describing the bird or the city reflected in its feathers? Feeding pigeons can be an act of cruelty. That sounds anti-pigeon. It is the opposite. A handful of seed given to one hungry bird feels like kindness because the result is immediate. The bird eats. But repeat that ritual across a plaza every day with bread, scraps, and sacks of grain, and kindness becomes infrastructure. An artificial food supply supports more birds than the area can safely house. Pigeons crowd into the same nesting sites, breed more successfully, compete more intensely, and deposit more waste in smaller spaces. Disease risk rises inside the flock before it rises for you. In Barcelona, researchers reduced deliberate feeding in 2 districts, and pigeon density fell by about 40%. In Singapore, the distribution of pigeons tracked both the urban landscape and mercy feeding. The population follows the calories we make available. But the opposite slogan, just stop feeding them, can also become an excuse for indifference. Sudden bans are difficult when flocks have become dependent on predictable feeding sites. Culling birds while leaving the food and nesting conditions untouched often creates an empty space for survivors and newcomers to refill. Contraceptive bait has produced promising results in some trials and no clear population reduction in others. There is no magic pellet that absolves a city of management. The humane answer is less emotionally satisfying because it is work. Secure waste, stop mass scattering of food, protect buildings without trapping birds, support supervised lofts where appropriate, replace eggs to reduce reproduction, and give injured or domestic-looking birds access to rescue. Do not confuse feeding with caring. Caring includes what happens after you walk away. If your kindness helps create the suffering you return tomorrow to relieve, who is the feeding really for? One of the world's first global news businesses was built around a gap in the internet, and Pigeons closed it. In 1850, there was a break in the telegraph line between Brussels and Aachen. Trains could carry stock prices across it, but not quickly enough. Julius Reuter used 45 trained pigeons instead. Each day, the birds traveled to Brussels by rail, then flew the information back to Aachen in about 2 hours. Reuters was fast before it had cables because it had wings. Then came war. In October 1918, hundreds of American soldiers were trapped behind German lines in the Argonne Forest. Their own artillery began falling on them. Radio was unreliable. Runners could be shot. According to the story preserved at the Smithsonian, with some details still disputed, their last available homing pigeon, Cher Ami, was released carrying their position. The bird returned wounded. The shelling stopped. Cher Ami became credited with helping save the lost battalion. That was not magic. A homing pigeon can be transported far from its loft and navigate back across unfamiliar country using a suite of cues scientists are still working to fully understand. Humans did not invent that ability. We industrialized it. Then radio, telephone, and satellite communication made the living network obsolete. The animal that had carried market prices, military orders, and news across borders lost its job almost overnight. We remember the messages, we forgot the messengers. And now, when the descendants of those birds stand beneath our monuments, we call them stupid because they no longer perform a service we value. How quickly does gratitude expire once an animal stops being useful to you? A pigeon can remember the person who was cruel to it. The harder question is whether you can remember what we did to the pigeon. In an experiment with wild city pigeons, 2 people entered a park wearing similar coats. One fed the birds peacefully, the other chased them away. Within several sessions, the pigeons learned whom to avoid. When the 2 people exchanged coats, the birds still distrusted the hostile person. They were not reacting to a uniform. They were recognizing an individual. Other experiments have shown pigeons learning abstract numerical order and distinguishing visual patterns in written words from nonsense. That does not make them tiny humans. It makes bird-brained a confession about our ignorance, not theirs. Are they friendly? They can be social, curious, and remarkably comfortable around people, especially when habituated. But a feral pigeon is not automatically asking to be touched. Friendship with a city animal begins by allowing it boundaries as well as food. So how should pigeons live? Not in poisoned flocks, not in endlessly expanding crowds sustained on bread, not sealed alive behind netting, and not treated as toys for anyone who wants a photograph. They should live in cities that manage the relationship they created. Clean, supervised nesting spaces where feasible. Controlled, nutritious feeding tied to those spaces. Egg replacement or carefully monitored fertility control. Secure rubbish, humane exclusion from dangerous buildings, and rescue for birds that are injured, entangled, or clearly abandoned domestic animals. The pigeon problem is not proof that pigeons fail to live with us. It is proof that we never decided what should happen after they stopped working for us. When an animal survives the job you bred it to do you owe it extermination or retirement?